Hello, everyone. So I'd like to welcome you to today's MASS webinar. Introduction to our speaker. Emily is a second-year PhD student at the Institute of Life and Earth Sciences at Heriot-Watt. Their research focuses on mapping cumulative effects of human activities on marine mammals to inform management, planning and conservation efforts. Emily is the Scottish representative for the ICES Working Group on Cumulative Effects Assessments in Management. Their background is in marine mammal population ecology, having previously worked on photo ID projects around Scotland, researching both bottlenose dolphins and the regional decline of harbour seals. So alongside their research, Emily plays an active role in science communication and collaborative community science, and I think that Emily has included their Twitter handle on their last slide, so make sure to follow. A reminder that the work Emily is presenting was recently funded by the Saltire Emerging Researchers Scheme, which was a joint collaboration between the Scottish Funding Council and MASTS. So that's enough from me. I'd like to hand over to today's speaker.
So I'm going to present today the Scottish Vessel Project. So this is a project that kind of formed as part of my PhD, and it's grown arms and legs and wheels and wings since then, and is grown into a huge Scotland-wide project. And I'm really excited to present a few updates 2 years in about how we're doing in understanding coastal vessel activity around Scotland. On the slide is just some of the main people that were at the start of the Scottish Vessel Project coming to the fore, but really, as you'll see as I go through the next 20 minutes, there's a huge amount of people involved and that have been instrumental in getting things off the ground and have got their place in different parts of the project around Scotland. So I just want to say a big shout out to everybody that's involved. Yeah, and I'm really excited to be presenting how we're getting along so far. So the idea behind the project, or the underlying theme, is that we really want to understand coastal vessel activity around Scotland. This, surprisingly, I guess it was surprising to me as well, we don't have huge amounts of really good data about vessel activity around Scotland. So there's different types of vessel activity that you can have. So I'll talk about AIS data in a minute in more detail, but there's other data known as VMS, which just captures fishing vessels, but that only pings a ping every 2 hours, so you miss there's lots of gaps in those 2-hour bits of data of what fishing vessels are doing and where they're going. And then other than that, there aren't many other types of data that we can use to characterize vessel activity. And we want to know about vessel activity because we want to know about what things are going on around the coast, what potential impacts they might have to things like marine mammals, which is what I'm interested in, to seabirds, to the fish, to all of the other cool things that are in the seas around Scotland. So it's really important for us to understand the stressor, that we understand actually where it is, what type of vessels there are, what are they doing, and how that changes over the course of the year. So the underlying theme of this whole talk is just trying to get a better grip of what's going on in our coast around Scotland. So to give an overview of AIS data in more detail, this type of data is known as automatic identification system. And legally, following the International Maritime Organization's rules, lots of large vessels over a certain tonnage, carrying a certain number of passengers, over a certain length, have to legally transmit their AIS information, which is basically, if you imagine, each vessel sends a little ping out up to a satellite, which gives information on its identity. So who it is, what type of boat it is, where it is exactly, what speed it's traveling at, or is it still, what bearing is it traveling on, so which direction is it going in, what is its intended port that it's going to get to next. So quite a lot of information in each one of those pings, and they can send like lots of pings a minute. So it gives, when you map those out, it gives us a really good idea of the track that is going on and where it's going on around Scotland. Next up is non-AIS vessels. So these are vessels, things like speedboats, jet skis, small fishing vessels, so under 15 meters long, yachts, sailing vessels, and these legally don't have to transmit their AIS information. So it means that when they're out at sea, they don't legally have to tell anyone that they're going out, what they're doing, where they are. So when it comes to mapping and getting an idea of what's going on around Scotland, we don't really have a way of knowing where these vessels are or what they're doing or how the volume of them changes over the course of the year. So, but these legally don't have to transmit their position, I should say. But when it comes to scientists like us wanting to know what they're doing and where they are, it's really difficult to capture and to kind of quantify that information. And then there's a whole heap in the middle that are in a bit of a grey area. So military vessels legally don't have to transmit their position of where they are. Sometimes they do, and then sometimes they switch it off for obvious reasons, because you can track vessels with AIS. And then there are other vessels that will pop an AIS transmitter on the boat for safety reasons, because it's a really good way for, say, search and rescue vessels to know where you are. If you get into trouble, you can find someone straight away using AIS data. So some boats will just buy them and pop them on board for safety as well, but because they don't legally have to have them on all the time, they might switch them on and off at certain times. So there's a whole heap of vessels that are in a grey area of sometimes they do transmit AIS and sometimes they don't. So the theme of the whole of the Scottish Vessel Project is just trying to get a handle on AIS versus non-AIS, how right or wrong is it? And to do this, first up, we've collaborated with a company called Fleetmon to deploy a whole suite of network of AIS receivers around Scotland. So AIS is commercial data. You normally have to purchase it, and it's worth quite a lot of money. So working with Fleetmon, we've been able to put loads of receivers around Scotland. You can see we've established this really cool network, and it's given us a good understanding of a lot of different areas around Scotland. So I want to say a big shout out to all the people that are hosting receivers and helping collect the data. So the greeny blue bluffers that are around the receiver sites give you a rough indication of the kind of range that they're picking up. So some of them will go, say, if you've got really good unrestricted coverage with no big hills or land in the way, they can pick up between like 20 to 50 miles away the vessel AIS data if they're pinging their position of where they are. Whereas some sites that are a bit more restricted, maybe in really scenic areas with lots of mountains, the AIS signals get blocked, so they might only be picking up 1 to 2 miles away. But this gives you a rough idea of roughly how far we're covering around Scotland. And this is what AIS data looks like. So this is just a snapshot in time that I took of what our receivers at different sites around Scotland are picking up. So you can see we've got, in collaboration with the Isle of Arran coast, we've got one on Arran in Lamlash Bay, and you can see that this is a screenshot of what it was picking up at any one moment in time. So pink, all the pink ones are fishing vessels, so you can see they, at the time that I took the screenshot, there's lots of fishing boats out transmitting their AIS positions. And then up in Shetland, we've got one at Oliveberry in collaboration with Shetland Webcams. Again, you can see how far it's picking up and the different types of vessels it's picking up. And then again, in the Firth of Forth, we're getting pretty good coverage there, right out to this offshore wind farm that's being built. So that's what those cluster of vessels are there, building the offshore wind farm and piling in some turbines there. So you can see already, just in the few seconds I've explained these this data to you, we can see lots of fishing activity over in Arran and then an offshore wind farm being built over in the Firth of Forth. So really cool, lots of information that you can get just via AIS data. But then what about the non-AIS vessels that I was talking about? So to get an idea of those, we've collaborated with WDC Shorewatch to develop a dedicated vessel watch data sheets. So these are basically, so WDC is a wildlife conservation charity interested mainly in whale and dolphins, so cetacean species. And in Scotland, they have this program called WDC Shorewatch, where they have set sites around Scotland where they train volunteers to go out and do sightings effort-based watches, where they record what marine mammal species they see from that site within a certain period. And really cool, for the past 2 years, we've been training up volunteers and getting them to also fill in these dedicated vessel watch data sheets, which means that they're also recording, as well as the cool animals that they see, and they're also recording what vessels they see. So they'll record the vessel type, where it is, what direction it's traveling in, the rough speed, what activity it's doing, say maybe a type of fishing, or whether it's anchored. And then if they do see it at the same time as a marine mammal, whether or not there was an interaction with the vessel, whether or not the interaction was initiated by the animals themselves or by the boat, and whether the animal's behavior changed, and if so, in what way did the behavior change. So this is a really good way for us to get eyes on the ground of what is actually out at sea, and then compare that directly to what the AIS receivers in the same area picked up. And then you can figure out, say, how many of those speedboats and jet skis and yachts were out there that were missing from the AIS data. And I guess in exactly the same way and type of approach as getting eyes on the ground, we've got time-lapse cameras on the ground that are also out there recording what is actually out at sea. So the time-lapse cameras we've got up are taking a picture once every 30 seconds, with the idea being that we have got this really cool computer program software from over in Canada, and we overlay AIS data on the time-lapse camera footage, and it tells us whether the vessel that we can see in the video has also ping in an AIS position at the same time. And then if it's not, we can record what vessel type it is and how many vessels in that recording were or were not transmitting their AIS position. So a really cool way for us to get eyes out on the water to see like how accurate AIS data is if we were just using that alone and we didn't have eyes out there having a look at what was actually out there. So for AIS receivers themselves, I just wanted to give a big shout out to just some of the collaborators that we've got hosting these receivers. You can see this is a huge network growing across Scotland, including community groups, commercial businesses, even individuals are also hosting them at some sites too. So I'm super excited and want to give a big shout out to everybody that's helping. Anybody who's interested in wildlife and nature will know that lots of these sites are important for other species additional to marine mammals, so birds and stuff like that. So I'm really keen for us to work together to explore what else can be done with this data. I'll talk about that at the end, but I just wanted to give a big shout out to everyone that's got a receiver so far. Some of them had them up for 2 years, and some, like the Hebridean Whale and Dolphin Trust, just received theirs this week. So I'm really excited for this to continue rolling out. It's a really cool way that we're all connected across Scotland. So I'm just going to dive into more detail now into just some examples of what we're doing with the data so far. So hot off the press, this week, my supervisor, Dr. Lauren McWhinney, and I found out that we've been successfully funded for a student research experience placement with NERC and UKRI and the Super DTP funding via MASTS to help a student, basically pay a student to work on a project over the summer, collaborating with the Isle of Arran Coast Community of Arran Seabed Trust to work with them to have a look at their AIS data that's coming in through them. So that was the site that I was talking about, where we could see lots of vessels activity around the coast. But what's really interesting about Arran is that it's got a dedicated no-take zone where certain types of fishing is banned completely. It's really unique for Scotland at the moment. And then it's also quite a lot of the Arran coastline also falls within the South Arran Marine Protected Area. So neither of these protections or designations ban vessel or recreational vessel activity in that area. But if we look at just AIS data, like I was talking about before, that is not going to probably be giving us an accurate picture of what's going on in those protected areas. So while some activities like fishing might be banned, what about those other activities that we know sometimes might be impactful to the marine environment too, like speedboats, jet skis, those types of things. So we're hoping that over the course of the summer, we can capture some data that just gives us a bit of an insight of what else is going on in those areas, additional to the fishing that's now banned from some of those areas. We're still awaiting to hear back from another funder, which would give us an extra cool camera, so fingers crossed on that one, and we'll keep updated on Twitter with how that project's going. Some other projects that we've got ongoing that are based out of Heriot-Watt as well. We've got 2 masters projects going on that I thought would be interesting just to mention. So the first one will be looking over the next summer or year or so, 2 years of time-lapse camera footage data that we've collected to try and quantify what I was talking about before, the AIS versus non-AIS question. And we're going to have a look at time-lapse camera footage and maybe even some weather cam footage to have a look at how wrong or right is AIS data in the Firth of Forth, and how does that change over the course of a year? Really exciting to me. I've mentioned marine mammals a lot. I guess that's the species of interest that got me into this field. We're also going to have a project looking at overlap with marine mammals in the Firth of Forth. So as lots of you will probably know, the Firth of Forth is increasingly becoming a really important place for quite a number of marine mammal species. So we've seen humpback whales this year, it's lots of bottlenose dolphin sightings and lots of other things that keep popping up too. So really interested to look at how vessel activity overlaps with marine mammal activity. When these animals are coming to the area, what sorts of vessels are they coming into contact with and maybe interacting with? Just to get an idea of any potential for impacts or what they're experiencing by coming to the area at certain times of year, and whether we can reduce those conflicts, for example. So lots of good stuff coming out. But I guess for me, with my PhD, I'm really interested in kind of the underlying question that I've talked about throughout the start of the talk, was how accurate is AIS data in representing vessel traffic around Scotland? So really getting to grips with the different sites around Scotland and whether or not the AIS data that we used there would be representative of what is actually out at sea there around Scotland, and whether or not this changes over the course of a year, whether AIS becomes more accurate or less accurate in summer, for example, and whether some sites of, say, the AIS is really accurate year round, so we can quite reliably use that to characterise vessel activity. Whereas are there other sites or different areas around Scotland where AIS is super inaccurate because not many vessels there transmit, so we could think about other ways to monitor vessel activity there. So I've mainly been using the WDC dedicated vessel watch data and comparing that with AIS data to really get a grip of what the watchers said was there versus what the AIS data said was there. So that's the kind of the crux of my a few chapters of my PhD. So I just want to give you a little insight into some graphs of what we've found so far. So like I mentioned, we've been collecting data for almost 2 years now. So I can give you a bit of an overview of what the data could look like, and we are beginning to see some trends. This isn't final numbers or anything, so certainly don't cite me on it just yet, but I'm excited to share, I guess, what we've come across so far. So here is a graph of average percentage of vessels that not transmitting AIS. So this is for the watchers across all the sites, and you can see that on average over the whole course of a year, so we've got January to December on the bottom and a little number for each month, the average percent of vessels not transmitting AIS is always somewhere at the moment between 40 and 60% of vessels out there being seen are not transmitting their AIS position. But super interesting, I think, here is that in the summer, so between July, August and September, the proportion of vessels not transmitting their AIS increases, which basically means that in the summer months, AIS becomes less accurate at properly characterising what vessels were out at sea at that time. Super interesting, I guess, is that it never gets down to zero. So AIS never becomes completely accurate at any time of year overall across Scotland. And the overall average percent of vessels not transmitting AIS across the year is almost 50% of vessels. So we're underestimating vessel activity on average by 50%, the data tells us so far. How does AIS versus non-AIS vary by location? So I've broken this down, the data down a little bit into different sites where we've had lots of effort. So the Firth of Forth in blue, the Moray Firth in orange, and Shetland in yellow. And you can see that the story gets a little bit blurrier once we start to look at site-by-site proportions. So basically, I think the take-home message I kind of wanted to show here was just that there's some months where the average percent of vessels not transmitting AIS is kind of similar. So in April and November, you can see that the average percentage is quite similar. So the level that AIS is inaccurate is similar, whereas in other months it's really different across sites, which means the transferability and what we're finding across sites might be different. And I'm looking forward to diving into that in more detail, I guess, in the next year of analysis and data collection. But overall, you can see again, the trend is in the summer is when AIS is least accurate. So what are the implications of this? So you might be wondering why I'm rambling on about AIS and non-AIS data and why it's important, but the implications are that we use AIS data when we map vessel activity, when we predict underwater noise, when we predict impacts to marine mammals, when we predict strike risk to animals. All of the kind of scientific data that's coming out about vessels always relies solely normally on AIS data, but if it's 50% wrong, then that kind of could imply that we're underestimating underwater noise. If we only use AIS data by almost 50%, we're underestimating our impacts to the marine environment by almost 50% if we're only using AIS data to predict vessel activity. So there's quite huge implications of, I guess, these findings of how frequent non-AIS vessels are at sea. And just to go into more detail about some other things that we're going to pull out of the data, some other questions that we can ask from the data. So this is the average proportion of vessel types per watch that we're seeing. So this is a really interesting way to characterize different sites around Scotland in terms of what vessels they see from their shores. So in the Moray Firth, we're seeing the most often vessel types that we're seeing are very large vessels. So tankers, ferries, cruise ships, large motorboats and small motorboats. So they're quite regularly seen, speedboats. Whereas in the Firth of Forth, the most common vessel types seen are small fishing vessels, so your creel type fishing vessels, and then very large vessels, so again, tankers and ferries. So you can see that the types of vessels in the different areas are a little bit different. And again, in Shetland, the most commonly seen vessel types are smaller fishing vessels, larger fishing vessels, and then very large vessels, your tankers and ferries again. So why is this important? So the different types of vessels pose different types of risks to the marine environment and have potentially different types of impacts. So they have different noise soundscapes that come from them. They also likely do different behaviours. So fishing vessels might be doing one type of activity, whereas small motorboats and speedboats might be whizzing off and around in erratic courses, and then kayaks and paddle boards and rowboats are again maybe a lot more coastal, having a look around the coastline. So you can really dive into what potential impacts those vessel types might be having on the area, and you can look at the different areas to see what are the most frequently vessels seen at that site to predict what types of impacts those sites might be at risk of. So one final graph, I promise, and then I'll leave you to questions. So this is, again, what I was talking about. I'm interested in the potential overlap in interactions with marine mammals. So this is just from the 2 years of data collected so far. There's been about 600 watches. So I should say that the total number of interactions with marine mammals was about 30. So compared to the total volume of watches, it's pretty low how often we're seeing interactions with marine mammals. Negative interactions, I should say. But you can see quite clearly that there's a front runner in the most common vessel type that's having negative interactions with marine mammals. So even though small motorboats like speedboats and recreational boats were seen relatively infrequently at most sites, these are the vessels types that contribute the most to the number of negative interactions with whales, dolphins and seals. So I find this graph really fascinating because it means we can use it to inform outreach and educational programs about where do we need to educate vessel users about how to interact in a good way and a positive way with marine mammals. So that would be, we would currently, according to this graph, target a lot of outreach in our time into talking to and educating small boat users about how to view wildlife responsibly, and to, if they do see any marine mammals, to make sure that any interaction is a positive one and doesn't cause any behavior changes for the species. Yeah, so a super fascinating result that's come out of this so far. I think the reason that we see more interactions and negative interactions with small motorboats is just due to the nature of the activity that small motorboats are wanting to do. Generally, the people that buy boats because they love being out at sea and they want to see the marine wildlife that's out there. So if they see a whale or a dolphin or a seal, they're going to stop and have a look. Whereas other boats like fishers, very large vessels, they've got a job to do out at sea. They're heading off on their constant course, either to the fishing ground or on a set route. So they're not stopping to have a look at any wildlife and hang around. And ports, and they tend to be a little more out at sea compared to where recreational vessel users might hang around. So that might be playing a big role in why we're seeing the more interactions with that type of vessel, just because of the nature of why they're out at sea. So future plans and ongoing work. So I've only had 20 minutes to give you a very quick overview of what we're doing so far. There are more AIS receivers being deployed with as we speak, which is super exciting. And we're still continuing to roll out that network. So do get in touch if you're interested or if you know anyone that might be. And we're using the data as well in future and ongoing work to try and understand risk to marine mammals. So I talked about strike risk before, and to predict underwater noise. So lots of other exciting avenues that we're going down with the data that we're collecting. I'm really interested and excited in taking the Scottish vessel project to the sky, and starting to look at whether we can use aerial survey data, satellite imagery to characterize AIS versus non-AIS vessel activity around maybe further offshore of Scotland, just to give us an idea of where AIS data becomes more accurate as we get out to sea. But yeah, there's lots of cool stuff in the pipeline and in the works, so please do keep up to date on Twitter. You can follow me at Emily Hague. I've got a QR code on the screen that should hopefully take you to the Scottish Vessel Project website. We're hoping to make sure that all of the publications we put out there are open access and really engaging and exciting projects coming out of this, as hopefully you've seen from just the insight I've given in the 20 minutes. But I should say as well, there is so much data coming in that we kind of don't know what to do with. So if anybody is interested in working with some of the data, maybe if you're interested in seabirds or the benthos or fish and want to look at vessel impacts on those, we'd be super excited to hear from you. So please do get in touch. Yeah, super open to making sure this whole network of data that's being collected across Scotland is useful to help better understand what's going on across Scotland. Huge shout out to all the collaborators and funders. A really big thank you. I don't think I've managed to fit all the collaborators on the slide, but I just wanted to say that this is absolutely not me. This has been a huge effort with folks across Scotland helping out. So I want to give a big shout out to everyone that's helping and continues to do so. It's really exciting to have a whole network of people across Scotland contributing to better understanding our seas. Yeah, so please do keep in touch, and I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was really interesting, especially about almost, what was it, 50% don't use AIS. So we already have some questions coming in. I think the first one from James was actually asking whether you were looking for additional time-lapse cameras, and I think he also has an AIS receiver, so perhaps you should get in touch via email.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I'll maybe write my email address in the side because I've just stopped sharing my screen, but I can write that. It'd be great to hear from them and get in touch and see if we can do anything useful.
Okay, so James, please reach out to Emily. The next question from Martin asks, have you tried to relate your vessel monitoring data with ambient underwater noise monitoring recorders? The contribution of non-AIS users to underwater noise records would be valuable for validating records for the UK Marine Strategy and OSPAR Descriptor 11 reporting. Researchers at SAMS and CFAS, amongst others, would be interested.
Yeah, so this would be the total dream to do that. And if anybody has got hydrophones out, I know that CFAS and folks at SAMS do, I would be really excited to explore doing that. It's been done elsewhere and they've found exactly kind of what I expected, as what I've described in this talk, is that they recorded underwater noise and then they looked at what they would have predicted the soundscape would have sounded like based on the AIS data collected at the same time, and it was way off the charts louder than they were expecting it would have been, which demonstrated from them watching as well that they could see that there were speedboats and stuff going past that were really heavily contributing to lots of underwater noise that they wouldn't have found if they just used the models. So yeah, it's been done. I think that was a study in Denmark, and a little bit of work's been done in the UK as well, but it'd be really cool to bring it up to date and have a look at that again now to see how wrong the underwater noise models are.
Okay, thanks, Emily. The next question's from Alison, who says, fascinating stuff. How does the AIS data in marinetraffic.com compare with what is provided by FleetMon?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. So marine traffic and FleetMon are examples of commercial companies that they have their own networks of AIS receivers, and then they're displaying them online for people to see, and then people can buy it. So like Heriot-Watt University or other universities can buy that data to analyze. So it's sold at a commercial price in the UK, but in like Canada and I think in Denmark and other countries, AIS data is provided to research from the government for free. So it's not commercial data in all countries. It's just the UK and a few others that seem to not share it openly. But it means that companies like Marine Traffic and FleetMon kind of work they do buy each other's data and then share. Say if they've got gaps in their network in one site, they'll buy one another's data. But it means that what you're seeing on each site is a little bit different because they've got these different networks, but sometimes they're buying it to cover one another. So again, it's another kind of question mark over AIS data overall, and purchasing AIS data is you never quite know what you're getting and where it's come from. Yeah, so I guess that answers your question, that it's basically a bit woolly everywhere.
Hopefully that answers your question, Alison. The next question from Vicky says, are the data sets available from Global Fishing Watch at a scale / resolution to be useful for Scotland?
So the Global Fishing Watch is just doing amazing things for sharing data. At the moment, so for anyone that doesn't know, Global Fishing Watch, they are collecting global data sets of AIS data, mainly focusing on fishing, but they're starting to dip their toe into all vessel types. And they make available very recently, like maybe from 2 days ago would be available on there now, to anyone to download AIS data. But it tends to have been processed a little bit, which is why I wasn't able to use it for my project. So it tends to be sort of given as densities of vessel activity in a certain area rather than unique vessels. And then for the unique vessel types, it's mainly just been fishing vessels that they share the data of, and I'm interested in all vessel types across the board and not just the fishing vessels, but they seem to be changing at pace with what they're sharing. So yeah, anyone who's interested in vessel data, keep an eye on Global Fishing Watch, because they're doing lots of really cool stuff and making this data a lot more open access and available for us all to use.
So thank you for the question, Vicky. Last one from Kelly. She says, great way of thinking outside the box in terms of data collection. Could the AIS data be used as a proxy for fishing activity? I'm not sure if they can give an indication of vessel speed, i.e. slow speeds may indicate potential activity in prohibited areas.
Yeah, so this is another avenue that I would love to go down. So because we've got this land-based watch data where people have recorded what they can see the vessels doing, so they can see if the vessel was creeling or if it was trawling, we've kind of can say that the AIS data that collected at the same time as that's what that vessel was doing. And then you can use like I think it's hidden Markov models and other fancy models that I haven't done for years to say that this type of speed and activity and change in bearing gives them is when they're doing this certain fishing activity, and then get a model to pull out when it predicts that they were doing the fishing activity elsewhere. There is quite a few papers and lots of research groups that are using AIS data to predict fishing activity in certain areas, and it's certainly something I would love to do with this data. And you could ground truth it with the land-based watch data to say, yes, the model predicted and the land-based watch data agrees that that's what that fishing vessel was doing. Yeah, so you can see the huge amount of things that we could do with all this data. So if anybody wants to come and help, that would be awesome. Please do get in touch.
So thank you very much again to Emily, and thank you everyone for attending today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for coming in for your cool questions. Thanks.